Hello and welcome to the Event Elves YouTube channel. I am Papa Elf and today I'm going to show you how to create rich Instagram posts using Inkscape. Inkscape is a free and open source vector graphic editor. It is cross-platform and will work in Windows, Mac, and Linux. This video is divided into chapters for your convenience, so feel free to navigate or skip to any of the ones that interest you. Today, I'll show you how to create a rich Instagram post like this one. Let's go ahead and get started. When you start Inkscape for the very first time, you're going to see this welcome screen. I'm just going to leave everything at a default since this is most likely what you're going to have, and press save. After this quick setup, we're greeted with this dialog box. If you're opening Inkscape for the very first time, you may not have any recent files, so this will be empty. But for now, I'm just going to start a new document. So I've got our new document opened up over here, and what I'm going to do is just give you a brief overview of the user interface. In the top here, we've got some of our toolbars. On the left, we've got our select tool and most of our drawing tools. In the middle, we've got our drawing canvas, and as you can see here, we've got our page, it's blank. At the bottom, we've got color palettes here to help us change colors. And on the right here, we've got our properties toolbox, which we're going to be using a lot to modify properties of the objects that we will be working with today. And finally, here, a little bit tucked away, is our snapping toolbar. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to set up our page size correctly. So we'll go to File, Document Properties, and it should show up here on the right-hand side. At a default, it's set up at an A4 size. What we're going to do is we're going to create a custom size. Now for Instagram, if you look it up, they like you to post something 1080 by 1080 pixels. So that's what we're going to be using today. Now you can see our canvas change here to a square. The other thing that I like to do is make sure that we check on checkerboard background so that if we have any white elements or white graphics, it's not going to disappear into the white background. It just helps us to see things nicely. So that's pretty much the setup that we need. What we're going to do now is be safe, and we'll make sure that we save as. And I've already got a file set up over here, and let me just overwrite that. It's saved as an SVG file or a scalable vector graphic file. Of course, you can use any photos, but for the sake of this tutorial, I'm going to download a photo from one of my favorite websites. So the website is called pexels.com. You can visit this. They've got really nice high-resolution photos that you can use, and even some videos that you can use. Feel free to practice, to download, and the best part is that most of these are free to use and free to modify. Since Easter is coming up, I'm just going to type in Easter over here, and we're going to find a photo together that we can work with. Just having a bit of a scroll down, and I think I really like this photo. I think this will look great with some white text on the top with a simple message, and I really like the color scheme as well. It's nice and neutral. So I'm going to go ahead and download this to my computer. So going back to Inkscape over here, let me just open up my file manager where I've downloaded the photo. And the easiest way to import a photo into Inkscape is just simply to drag and drop. It's going to prompt you with this dialog. I usually just leave everything at a default and press OK. And we can see here our photo is quite huge. So let me just press S, Control S to save. I will zoom out by holding the Control key and using the mouse wheel to zoom out. And let's just move this to the side so that we can see it next to our canvas. So you'll see that we need to do a bit of resizing. So to resize this, it's pretty simple. Make sure that we're clicking on the select tool. If you like to work with the keyboard, that's the letter S as a shortcut. Now we can resize it by moving one of these handles. What I want to do is I want to lock the aspect ratio to make sure that the image does not get distorted when I resize it. So if you forget to lock it, what could happen is if you do resize it, it can get distorted in such a way that it doesn't really make the image look nice. It makes it look wonky, and it definitely is a telltale sign that you've done something with it. Let's keep that locked, and let's resize this a little bit more. And I'm going to zoom in here to give you a better view. The other way that you could zoom in as well is here at the bottom. We've got the percent, so I can press on this to fine tune my zooming. I think that's about it. It gives us a bit of space. The next thing that I want to do is I want to crop this image. Now I'm going to spend a little bit of time explaining how to crop in Inkscape because it's actually not necessarily that intuitive. So the first thing that we should do is we'll create a rectangle. So I'm pressing my rectangle tool here and creating just a rectangle. It doesn't matter. So when you're creating a rectangle for the very first time, it's probably going to fill it in with some random color. It could be white, red. In my case, it filled it in with this fuchsia color. And that's fine. That's fine for our purposes right now. So I will select this. So make sure I press on the selection tool. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to resize this to be the size of our canvas. Now I will unlock it so that I could resize both sides, the length, the height, and the width. So I'll resize this to 1080 by 1080 pixels. Sorry, make sure to change it to pixels over here. 1080 by 1080. So as you notice, this is the same size as our canvas, and I'll show you why we did that here in a second. Now, the next thing that I want to do is I want to be able to overlay this over, and I want to be able to see through it so I can see where I'm cropping. So I will play around with the fill and the stroke. So the stroke is the outline, and the fill is obviously the fill for the inside. So we don't want to mess with the stroke at the moment, so I'll just make sure that there is no paint for that. And I want to double check to make sure that it didn't change the dimensions. As you can see here, it did change the dimensions, so I'll just switch that back to 1080 by 1080 because the stroke has a dimension of its own. So now that we've got that nicely reset back to 1080 by 1080, let's look at the fill. So here in the fill, there's a couple of places that we can adjust the transparency. We've got A here, which is the alpha, which we can lower to get our transparency, or we can also play with the opacity, which is down here. And as you can see, they achieve the same thing. It doesn't matter which one you choose. I typically just go with the alpha over here to get a bit of transparency. And as you can see, this color palette down here allows us to change the colors quickly. If you want a little bit more control of how you want to change the fill, there's a few different options here. You've got RGB, HSL, HSV, CMYK colors. You could use a color wheel to fine tune and adjust for the colors that you want. There's CMS. I don't really use this, so I don't know what this is for. And you can even pick a color from the image. So we could pick one out. But I'll just switch it back to the fuchsia, go back to the RGB over here, and turn the alpha down to about 40%. So we could see through the image now. Now think of this square as where our cutout outline is going to be for our crop. So now what I can do is I'll make sure to lock this. I'll reduce this so that I could cut out most of the eggs and a little bit of the plate. Just move that down. Let's say this is kind of where I want it. So the next thing is to select both squares. You can do that by dragging and selecting, or you could also press the shift button to add a selected item to your selection. So we've got both selected. We'll go to Object, Clip, and then Set. So that generates the crop that we need. Let's say you need to make adjustments. You're not happy with this. I want to move it around a little bit. Well, that's pretty easy. You go back to Object, Clip, and you release. And that brings you back to where you were. I'm going to make sure to click out. Let me just make like a minor adjustment over here. Just raise that a little bit. I will select both squares again. both rectangles, go to Object, Clip, and Set. Now this is the background that we want to be working with. So what we need to do next is to align this to our canvas, or put it as the background of our canvas. Now you could do it manually, but this is, as you notice, is going to take you forever. And to get the accuracy that you need, we really need to be using some tools. Well, don't worry, because Inkscape comes with that. So make sure that we selected our image over here. I'll go to Align and Distribute, and I will align and distribute relative to the page. We've got other options here based on the objects. Let's center it on the vertical axis, and let's center it on the horizontal axis. So that gives us a dead center alignment to the middle of the page. And that's looking pretty good. So we've got our baseline photo over here. What we want to do next is we want to add some text. So let's go ahead and press on our Create Text tool here. I'll just create the text here on the side, and just something really simple, something that says Happy Easter in 2 lines. Now, if I click here and make sure that the cursor is blinking, I have a few different options to change. So I can change the spacing between the baselines. So let's play around with this a little bit. So you see it extends the spacing between Happy and Easter. Let me just maybe extend that a little bit like that. I can change the alignment to be in the middle. I can change it to be right justified. So let's keep it in the middle. Maybe spacing between the letters. I'll play around with this a little bit just to show you. As you can see here, I've increased the spacing between the letters. So that gives us a bit of modification for our text. Now, if we want to change fonts, there's a different place for that. So let's go ahead over here on our right toolbar and go to Text and Font, or if you like to use a keyboard, Control-Shift-T. And now we have a selection of fonts. Now these fonts are going to be dependent on what fonts are installed in your system. So if there's something that you like, make sure that you install it in your system. When you open up Inkscape, it should show up there automatically. So there's a font that I've downloaded. This is actually a Google font here. It says Happy Easter. Let me just check the text. Here's another place that you can modify the text. So let's say add an exclamation point. It adds it, and it changed the font as well. So I can change the size of the font here if I wanted to. Let me just check. No, it doesn't look like it's letting me change it. 50, let me type it in. Yep. Or alternatively, what I can do is make sure to escape out. So just press escape to clear all of your selections. Make sure you're back at the select tool. Select our font over here. And I want to lock the aspect ratio, lock the proportion, and then resize that. So that's our way of playing with fonts. Now, because you created this font, you typed it in, it is actually a vector graphic. So we can play around with the fill and the colors. So here I could change the fill to white, can change it to whatever color I want. In this case, I'll just leave it at white. I will probably get rid of the exclamation point, so I can double click to edit this, delete the exclamation point. So there we go. So that's looking pretty good. I think that's also a good size. Next, I want to add the text from, and then import our logo in from Event-else. Let me add another text here. I'm just going to type in from, so just like we did before. Select that, and we're already in our text and font tab over here. So let me find a script text. So this looks pretty good. Let me add that. Make sure this is locked. The other way that you could also resize this and make sure the aspect ratio is locked is hold down the Control key as you resize. So I'll put that in here, and I'll change that to white. Let me take this down a little bit. So if you click again, it'll show up with these rotational handles. And what you can do is rotate your selection. So just go rotate it a little bit. That looks pretty good. Now I'm going to import in a logo. So the logo is going to be a PNG file, which has transparency. And this is our company logo. Again, I just click OK. So the transparency is great because it gives us clear view of our background. One thing I'd like to cover here is if you're adding a lot of elements now on your page, you might notice that it becomes a little bit harder to select one element from the other. So this is where using layers is really going to help you. I'm just going to show you how to add a layer and how to use that. I'll go to layers over here and then layer. It'll show up here. I've only got one layer, so everything is on layer 1. So I'm going to add a new layer, and let me call this background. I'm going to put it below the current layer. Let's add that. So we've got our background layer. I'll click on our background over here, right click, and I'm going to move the layer into my background. So now this background exists in the background layer. So I can lock it if I wish to. I can turn it on and off if I wanted to. So that makes it really handy. So now when I'm selecting some of these texts, notice that the background is no longer selected because I have locked it in place. So this is really helpful if you're having a hard time with placing these different elements around the page. So this is pretty good, and I will just rename this layer. So I just right-clicked, and I'll just name that as text. There we go. So that is more descriptive and easily identifiable which layer we're going to be working with. And I can also move elements around using my keyboard. So just using the arrow keys over here. If you hold down the Shift key, it'll give you a bit more movement, and holding down the Alt key will give you a bit finer movement. So let me just kind of position this a little bit better. I'm pretty happy with how that looks. If you notice in our example, we want to add a bit of filtering. So there's actually a text shadow that we can add here to make this pop out a little bit more outside of the page. So select our Happy Easter text over here. I'm going down to filters, shadows and glows, and I'm going to do a drop shadow. So your defaults might be different, but I've got mine set here at blur radius 3, horizontal offset 6, and vertical offset 6. Shadow type is outer shadow. Now you're not going to see anything unless you check this box here. So you'll see there's a little bit of a shadow that's generated. So that's kind of good. I think I want it a little bit stronger. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply this 2 times. So I'll apply it once, and then that shadow stays there. Now, the box doesn't close, actually, so you can actually apply this again. So you see, if I live preview it again, the shadow is a lot more pronounced. So let's go ahead and apply that again. And now I'm going to close this. So in case you get confused, it doesn't automatically close when you click on apply. So you might be applying the shadow twice or 3 times even. So just be mindful. So I'm happy with that. That gives it a bit of body. So helps the Happy Easter sort of stand out a little bit more. Now I still want to put a frame around here with a bit of transparency to really let it stand out and create sort of that greeting card sort of appeal. So I'm going to create a rectangle over here. And let me just use the keyboard to move this around. Go back to my select key here. Just using the keyboard. And don't worry too much about the dimensions here, because I'm going to show you a neat little trick that'll help you align everything. So that's cool. I like that framing there. I might have to move the event elves a little bit, but let's just work with this for now. I'm going to use the align and distribute tool, align it to the page to be in the middle and in the middle. Our rectangle, because we created this later on, it actually sits above the Happy Easter. So what you could do is you can move this to a lower layer. Alternatively, you can also lower this down as an object. So if we go up to our toolbox here, you can see lower the selection 1 step, or you could use the page down button. So let's do that. We'll lower it 1 step. Looks like nothing happened. Let's lower it down a little bit more. There we go. So you see the Happy Easter sort of emerge and the shadows emerge. So let me just undo that so you could see it again. So see, it's still behind. Because of that transparency, it's a bit hard to notice. When we lower it down, there we go. And let's see, the event elves here, I'm not sure if these are at the bottom, but what we can do is select it and we'll make sure to raise that all the way to the top to make sure. And I think just because of the coloring, it's actually, not that obvious. It kind of automatically put it in the color that I really liked, but I'll show you how to generate this color over here. So we'll go back to, let's select our rectangle, and let's go to our fill and stroke. And let's say we want to color match it to be one of the eggs, for example. So let's pick this blue here, or teal, right? So that color matched it like that. And to create the transparency, we've learned this before, you can lower down the alpha. So that's kind of how you can do that to get more of that color matching appeal. So I actually like that tan looking color before. So let's figure out which one that was. I think it was this one. And then let's lower the transparency down. Yeah, that looks a little bit nicer to me. Okay, this is looking pretty good, but we want to add one more thing here because I want to demonstrate one more thing for you is the outer white border. So really you could publish this. This is fine. This is looks like a pretty nice post. So we'll move things around a little bit to make some space for this border. I'm going to move this in here and let me just resize this. Now I'm going to unlock this so that I can resize. I have a little bit more control with the resizing. There we go. And I will align it again to the middle to make sure that all the edges are even, right? If you have that kind of OCD like me, but that's fine. This is good. Okay, finally, we're gonna add the white outline to create that picture frame sort of appeal. And that's really simple. So we'll cover that we'll do that using a lot of the concepts that we already done before. We'll create a rectangle. We'll create it with white. We'll change the fill and the stroke to make it 100% opaque. And just escape out of this. Check on my select tool again. And then resize this to be 1080 by 1080. Excellent. Now, let's move this to the middle of our page. So align and distribute, middle and middle. It's covering everything, unfortunately. So what we can do is we can move this to our background layer. So let's move that to the background layer. Awesome, but it's still covering our background photo. So let's go back to our layers section over here, Control-Shift-L, or you can click on the box here. Let's unlock our layers, background layer, and let's hide our text for now so that we only focus on the background layer. What we can do is make sure to lower this to the bottom, and to create that frame, I can reduce the size of this. You could crop it, that's true, but here's a quicker tip. Let me just reduce the size of this. So we've got 1080 by 1080. So let me just reduce it to, let's say, 1000 by 1000. So it's going to give a bit of a border line. And now we can align this to the page relative to the middle, and we've got our outline generated. Let's turn everything back on, and we've got our finished product. There it is, guys. Really simple. I know it took a bit of time to explain, but once you get into the workflow, this is going to be really quick and easy for you to do in the future. You can save your templates, you can generate many different kinds of varieties. And the best thing is Inkscape is free and it's cross-platform. So you can use it in Mac, Windows. I'm on Linux right now. I use it in Linux with zero problem. So let's go ahead and save this. And finally, export. So we go File, Export PNG Image. At a default, Inkscape is going to export in PNG format. So I'm not sure. I always upload into Instagram using JPG. You can always convert or save as later on with a different program as a JPG file. It does have a bit of support to save it as a JPG file instead of PNG, but I found that it can be a bit buggy and it may make your image look a bit wonky. I recommend always exporting as a PNG. So I'm exporting here, just renaming it as Instagram. There we go, it's done. And here is our final image. Thank you so much, guys, for your time today. I hope you learned something. Again, my name is Papa Elf from Event Elves. You can find us at eventelves.com.au. We are a print and promotional merchandising company based here in Brisbane. And if you're located in Australia, we'd love to work with you in your next promotional merchandising project. Take care. I'll see you next time.